recording. And mine shows that it is recording. All right, I am going to share my screen, and it will have the agenda that I sent to you. So last week we were talking about how money comes to your schools, and we talked about that it comes in local, and it comes state, and it comes federal, and that most of the teaching positions in your school system comes from the state. And generally, with a few exceptions, they're allotted as positions, and the state keeps the money and just sends it when they need to pay you. They usually put new teachers, unless it's a particular program, in the positions that require the least amount of money because they use those state allotted positions for the teachers that cost more. So there was a question about vouchers that came up, and I had not kept up with it, and so I talked to a finance officer that I knew, and she told me at this point the counties do not have to send any money to private schools. The state legislature in North Carolina has tried to put a voucher system in place, but it has not passed, and you don't want it to pass. You know, really, this is when you get into administration, is when you really need to start paying attention to how the legislature appropriates money. And so when you start getting alerts from NCAE, or if you belong to the Principals, Assistant Principals Association, or whatever group you belong to, pay attention to that information. It's not that always you will get listened to, but if they see that there's a lot of people that are not in favor of it, sometimes it will help. So they keep trying to do that, and allowing public school money to go to private schools, but so far it has not passed in North Carolina. Charter schools, the money goes straight to the charter school because they have the record of the enrollments for each one of the systems, including the charter schools. But the county does have to send, or the school system has to send money for the number of students that are in the charter schools. And so if one school has 10, the county will get a bill for the number of students that's enrolled from that particular county for that particular charter school, and then they'll have to pay it. It's a good deal for the charter schools. It is not a good deal for the county, the public schools. The reason I say it's a good deal for the charter schools is they don't have to beg the county commissioners for the money. It's the public schools in the county that really has to beg for that money. And when I say beg, literally, that is what is happening. You have to go and ask, and you go through meeting upon meeting upon meeting, trying to make sure that they understand what your needs are. Well, these charter schools don't have to do that. All they have to do is send you a bill. So that's one of the things that I wanted to make sure that you understood at this point in time. But that is something you need to watch yearly as far as what the legislatures are doing with vouchers. Now, some of the school systems lost a lot of money they were not expecting to lose this year, and it was because their economic tier changed. That's what happened to Yadkin County. Yadkin County and several other rural counties were in what was called Tier 1 for economic development. Now, when you're in school administration, that first doesn't make a whole lot of sense to you. But that the state uses those economic tiers to determine how much money extra a school system will get. For example, there's low wealth money that goes to the school system that are in the direst straits and have the least taxpayer money available to them. Well, Yadkin County and several of the other rural counties around this area got changed from a tier 1 to a tier 2. And when that happened, when they became a tier 2, they lost $400 and some thousand. That was not something that they realized was going to happen, and so it really caught them off guard, and they had to do a lot of cutting their budget once that happened. Now, the interesting thing about low wealth money is that's one of the few portions of money that they don't tell you how it has to be spent. So you look at your school and you look at your schools and decide who needs the most help and where you need it. And a lot of times they would use that low wealth money for a teacher assistance or for teachers to reduce the class size in some situations. So when you're dealing with that and you have that much cut, then you're looking at, you're having to cut people as well. So and there's not anything you can do about it because there's nothing that a school system can do about their economic tier. That is decided through the Department of Commerce, and the chambers of commerce all work with that. So tier 1 counties are the ones that are more distressed, so they will receive more money from the low wealth appropriation. One of the other things that is happening more and more frequently is people are homeschooling their children. And when that happens, there's no money that's sent to the school system for those children. They are registered with the state. But the interesting thing about homeschool children is there's no requirement about meeting standards. They're supposed to give an annual test, but they don't necessarily ever have to report to that. So I've got some information on homeschools on your agenda that I got from the non-public school website. And it defines a homeschool as consisting of the children of not more than 2 families or households where the parents or legal guardians or members of either household determine the scope and sequence of the academic instruction. They provide the academic instruction and they determine additional sources of academic instruction. Now, there is a general statute that amended changes to the definition, and it allowed parents to hire tutors to let their children participate in group settings and where there was some type of instruction such as co-ops and 4-H classroom instruction, and they could work with apprenticeships, homeschool doctor teaching them biology. And so this would give the homeschool parents more freedom to choose what they feel is best. Now, the interesting part is there's not a whole lot of follow-up with these. So, and when you look at the requirements, they don't have near the requirements that you and I had to meet in order to teach. The homeschool teacher must hold at least a high school diploma or its equivalent. They have to send a notice of intent that they're going to operate a homeschool, and they have to give their name and address, and then whatever name they're going to call their homeschool. And then they are supposed to, if you will notice here, they're supposed to give a nationally standardized test, and it's to measure achievement, and it's to cover English, grammar, reading, spelling, and mathematics. Now, the test has to be kept on file for at least 1 year. It is recommended that all test scores be retained for future reference to go in a student's personal file. It does not have to be machine scored, nor is there a minimum score requirement on any standardized test. You don't have to mail the test scores to DPI or the Department of Non-Public Schools unless it specifically requests you to do so. And so here's a list of all of the tests that they can give. Some of those you're familiar with. Some of them we use them in public schools for various things, but that's what they are recommended to do. And then it says, while there are other standardized testing options available, this is just a list of several of nationally known ones. So they are required to take an annual test. They are not required to submit the results. They may do so, but they don't have to. So do you have any questions dealing with homeschooling? Because that is where some of the children are leaving your school systems, but your school system doesn't have to pay for those kids because they're just not enrolled anywhere. They're enrolled in a non-public school, and that's the same with private schools at this point in time. Any questions? Now, there is one difference. If a child is a special needs child, and there are no schools that provide what is in the IEP that the child needs to be taught a certain way or a certain curriculum or something, and the county cannot provide it, then sometimes if the only provider is a private school somewhere, then out of the Exceptional Children's Fund, then they may have to pay for a particular type of training for that particular child. So that's your exception, and that would be where it's almost a voucher, but not exactly, because it goes with the child and what their IEP says and what it's determined is the best way to teach them. And if the system does not offer it, then they can contract with someone else to do it for them. And if the only provider happens to be a private school, then they can do that if the private school agrees to take them. Some of your smaller school systems, I know we had one that was close to us that would try to contract with us for some of their special needs children. And I looked at the superintendent at one of the meetings. I said, that's not exactly fair for us to be carrying your special needs kids. So we didn't do it very often, and most public schools don't look at that as something I want to do. Most school systems don't want to do it either because they have to send their money. And when it's a special needs child, they're getting the federal money that goes for that child, as well as their local money and the state money too. So that hopefully will clear up some of the issues about vouchers and some of the things that people had questions about. Now, I wanted to follow up. I told you last time that the two things that will get you fired quicker than anything else is something to do with inappropriate touching, sexual harassment, or money, misuse of money. So we talked about the money. We spent a lot of time talking about that. So I want to talk a little bit about sexual harassment. This is in one of the chapters, and it also connects to one of your case studies. Sexual harassment is defined as unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, verbal or physical conduct of a sexual nature is harassment if submission to such conduct is made either explicitly or implicitly a term or condition of an individual's employment. Submission to or rejection of such conduct by an individual is used as the basis for employment decisions, and the conduct has the purpose or of effect of unreasonably interfering with an individual's work performance or creating an intimidating and hostile or offensive work environment. So that's the definition. In 91, Title VII was amended to allow sexual harassment plaintiffs to sue for monetary damages. And then Title IX prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex in education programs or activities that receive federal assistance. Title IX both covers employees and students and almost all activities in a school district. So I mentioned that you'll probably want to review Chapter 13 in your school law textbook, as well as the one on student rights as you're talking about one of your case studies. Now, have any of you ever had a girl on a football team? Yes, no?
We had one briefly. She didn't make it past the first ball game.
Okay. What were you going to have to do for her if she had stayed on the team.
Accommodations for when she changed.
Absolutely. We ran into that, I want to say 10 to 15 years ago at one of our high schools. And this student, she stuck with it for a while, but maybe the whole season. She was a kicker. She didn't want to play the main football, but she was a kicker. So we had to find a place for her to have a locker room that was on or near where the field house was for the guys. So they did not force us to build a place, but we found an area that had been for concessions that we were able to turn into a locker room for girls while she was on the team. So that is something you have to do. If they go out for sports, you've got to have something. And then if it gets to the point that you're going to remodel or add to, then you have to do that to the facilities at that point in time.
So I have a question about that.
Yes.
It was an interesting situation this past fall in the wrestling season. I'm the first responder at our school, and I work with our athletic just went blank. Person who helps medically. I can't think of the term right now.
Trainer.
Anyway, one of our visiting schools had a female wrestler. During any wrestling match, they have to do weigh-ins and skin checks.
Ooh.
This young lady was not given separate locker room situation. She come in with the guys in her underwear, did the skin checks and the weigh-ins, and went on her way. Why would that be treated differently and her not be given a separate place for that?
I don't know. I don't have an answer for that. Do any of the rest of you have an answer for that? That's a good question, Brian. I don't know.
Apparently, it was the common thing for every school she went to, and they gave us a heads up to let us know that, yes, there's a female on the team. Fortunately, my athletic trainer is a female, so she did all the stuff for her, but it was just an awkward situation that she come in there with the guys, and they were all doing their weigh-ins.
Well, that would have been awkward for her and for you all both, I would have thought. And I guess as long as a parent didn't push it, then it probably is not an issue. But if a parent pushed it, I would think it might become an issue. That's just one of those things that many times it has to be pushed by somebody before it is taken care of.
Okay.
But I can certainly see where that would be an issue for someone to have to deal with. But, with Title IX, Title VII, you've got to let them at least try, and then they can do what they choose to do after that. Then some prohibited conduct regarding sexual orientation. And this is becoming more and more of an issue too. School district agents and employees must not fail to respond promptly and appropriately to complaints or allegations of harassment or discrimination on the basis of actual or perceived sexual orientation or gender identity. Now, this is one of the things that sometimes I have had students, when they get to the case study about the young men who want to come to the prom together, they're a homosexual couple, they get caught in, I don't believe in this myself. Well, when you're a public school employee, what is it you follow? You follow the law. You don't, and as long as it's not illegal, it may be something you consider inappropriate and not something you believe in, but you follow the law, because otherwise you can wind up in beautiful big letters on the newspaper, and you don't want that. The second part is you must not knowingly engage in, sanction, or allow harassing conduct on the basis of actual or perceived sexual orientation or gender identity. You must not retaliate against or take any actions that have the impact of adversely affecting any student or employee because that student or employee has made allegations, filed, or participated in a complaint with the district or a federal, state, local, or non-governmental entity concerning harassment or discrimination on the basis of actual or perceived sexual orientation or gender identity. And you must not coerce a student to enroll in alternative education or independent study programs because he or she has complained of harassment or discrimination on the basis of actual or perceived sexual orientation or gender identity. Now, I want to go ahead and talk a little bit about some of this. One of the things, the section here about retaliate against or take any action that have the impact of adversely affecting any student or employee. All right, that is an important thing for you all to think through. As the principal, if you get a report, not about sexual harassment, could be, but about a teacher doing something inappropriate with a student, you may think you know the teacher, and you may absolutely say, nope, that didn't happen. I know this teacher would never ever do anything like that. This is just a made up bunch of stuff. Well, you have to take the complaint and you have to start an investigation. And at some point in time, you're probably going to turn it over to the local law enforcement if it is something as severe as a student is accusing a teacher of doing something. And they took it to their parents and the parents have brought it to you. Many times you will be fooled. You will be sure that that did not happen. But when the teacher actually gets away from the school, gets away from his family or her family, and actually meets with the law enforcement, they may say that is true. But the teachers in your school will not believe it, and they will often try to treat the student differently. I actually had that happen in one of the schools where when I was a superintendent, and I actually had to go to the school and in front of the principal, with the principal, knowing what I was going to do, I had to have a conversation with the teacher because the teacher was so sure that the other teacher that was being accused had not done that. He just thought the student was making up all this stuff, and that if we were not careful, that he would be accused of the same stuff. And I had to point out to him, and the principal was glad I did because he didn't feel comfortable doing it with this particular teacher. I think they had had some conflicts before. And so he was more than happy for me to come and talk with the teacher in his presence. And I said, you have to treat this student like you would treat any other student. You cannot treat them differently. If you treat them differently, that's where you can get in trouble. So that's one of the things that you will always be surprised by. The other key that was a real surprise to me, if you put yourself in a position and someone goes to the principal and accuses you of inappropriate behaviors with a student, and you hear it from the first time from the principal and the superintendent sitting there with the principal because they asked them to come because of how sensitive the situation was, what's your first reaction going to be? Think about how you handle things. What's your first reaction going to be?
You're defensive.
You're defensive. And if you're defensive, are you going to possibly turn red, get just really anxious, show some kind of emotion, and you're going to say, I didn't do that. I don't know where this is coming from. But that's normal, the normal reaction, isn't it, from most people? Isn't that the normal reaction?
Unfortunately, I was in this situation as a teacher my first year teaching. I was a fourth grade teacher, and I was one of the only males in the school, and they decided it'd be great for me to take on the family life unit for fifth grade boys. So
Oh, lovely.
they took my class and split them up to the other fourth grade teachers, and I took in the boys. Well, earlier that day, I had upset some of the girls in my class, and they went out on the playground and made up this story that I was showing pornography in my classroom, and I had the lights off in my room, was having relations with the guidance counselor and all this kind of stuff. And they were talking about it at preschool or daycare, and the daycare supervisor overheard it, and she had to go and report it to the principal. And then it got to the superintendent at the board meeting that night, and they had to talk about it. And I get a phone call saying, "Do you know anything about this situation?" And I wasn't aware of anything because I was just going on with my normal day. But long story short, I had to go in the principal's office and have this discussion with him and the child and the parents that were going on to figure out what was going on. So I was turning red-faced. I was getting defensive and trying to state my case to protect myself because I didn't want to end up on the news as a first-year teacher.
Absolutely. And that's the normal reaction.
Right. And long story short, these two girls ended up staying in my class for the rest of the year, and it was very uncomfortable. And I even questioned, is that the right choice for them and for me? Because I'm going to hold this over them because that was big. That could have affected my entire life.
That was very big. And you reacted exactly the way I would have reacted. I think the way that most people would react. But the thing that I should have picked up on when we met with this teacher, I had known this teacher for years. There was no emotion, none, not 1 ounce of emotion. It was like we were reading a book, and we just read right straight along and told him, that we were turning this over to the sheriff's department. Well, as it turned out, the sheriff's department, the person assigned to do it, was related to this man's wife. And so she called in the SBI. And so that's a whole different crowd to get used to dealing with. Some of them are extremely professional, and some of them are not so professional. And so as a result of all of that stuff, I got a call from the DA, and he said, "Y'all didn't handle this well." And I looked at the wall, and I thought, what do you know about it? We called somebody the very first minute we knew anything about it. We turned it over to local law enforcement. We didn't try to do anything. So how did we not handle that right? And he said, well, the SBI agent said that you all did something. I don't even remember what it was now. And I said, she doesn't know what she's talking about. I said, we called as soon as it happened. We turned it over. They were here the very next day. We suspended the teacher with pay until it could be worked out. I said, you tell me what we didn't do right. Well, it must have been one of those years that was going to be an election, because he said, well, as soon as this is all over, we'll get together. Well, I haven't had that phone call yet. So I never heard another word from him about that. But this is the kind of stuff you get involved in when you're just doing your job and you're just doing what you're supposed to. And Barry, I am so sorry that that happened to you, but it could happen to anybody. And we're going to be talking about a case later, if we have time, when I get through most of this stuff, to look at a situation that could happen in a school in addition to some of the other things that you all have talked about in your groups. So, when you see odd reactions from teachers, then that's one of the things that I learned was my first question mark. If there is a difference of behavior from what you would normally expect, then that's an alert to you that, okay, there may be some truth to this. Even after they were doing their investigation, I still did not want to believe that this was true, because this was one of the best teachers at any particular grade. He had taught elementary and also high school. And he was excellent. And I just, for the life of me, could not believe it, and still have a hard time believing it, because what I observed and what I saw would never have done that. And so, but you had to take what law enforcement said they found, and you had to follow through with the information they gave you. So I'm just telling you that, because when someone has no reaction at all, then that should alert you that there's a red flag there. Not always, because everybody doesn't handle things the same way. Some people could hear that and they could just think, okay, that's not happening to me. That's somebody else, because they just don't comprehend, and they get mad afterward. But I had never, ever seen a person react so calmly, so quietly, never even turn red face or anything. And when we told him that we were going to have to suspend him with pay, it was still like no reaction. So you get into all kinds of things, and then when you get into dealing with the SBI and you deal with the DA, because they have to turn it over to the DA, then you get in a whole nother world that you're not prepared for, but you get prepared real quickly. With those situations, I always met with the teacher and the principal first before I alerted board members. And so, Barry, that I hate happened to you, because, and I guess it could happen to anybody that way, but if you're a good administrator, you're not going to tell your board members about it before you talk to the teacher. Unless there's some reason that the teacher can't be at school for a week and a half, and it has a chance of really blowing up in your face. So the best way to handle situations like that, as soon as you hear them, call the teacher in and at least share with the teacher what's being said, so that they will know what's going on. I always, on these kinds of things, my principals didn't call our board attorney, because every time you get a board attorney, you pay them for every call. So you have a retainer, and then you get a monthly charge. Now, the bigger school systems have their own attorneys, so they work for the system, so that's different. But the principals would call me, and then if there was something I couldn't find the information in the school law book, then I would call our attorney and we'd get an answer. So we always tried to handle things the way we should. When you're a principal or a superintendent of a school system that doesn't have a lot of money, you can't afford to make mistakes to where you're going to have to pay a lot of legal fees, because you're having to use money and pull it from somewhere to pay for those legal fees. So you try to do things the way they're supposed to be. Now, if you have got your school law textbook, I'd like for you to turn to page 328 and look at it. And what I'm really looking at is the suggested risk management guidelines on 328 for teachers and other employees. And these are just good ones that you would just remind your teachers of at the first of a year. It seems that every year we have more and more people accused of something that is either sexual harassment, inappropriate touching, or the making up the story about the showing porn. So, people are having to face this. A lot of times they are innocent as can be, but occasionally there's some truth there. And you always get surprised when there's truth, but you have to work really hard to treat those students the same way. But if you look on 328, it says, teachers and other school employees should not be alone with a student in a classroom outside of the regular school day without informing the principal. Should not be alone with a student behind a closed door. If a room door does not have a window, request that one be installed. Or leave the door open. Make a habit of meeting students outside of school. That's another thing not to do. Do not counsel students in non-academic matters. That's where guidance counselors come in. If they need guidance on something that's emotional or behavioral, refer them to the guidance counselors. Do not regularly transport students in your own vehicle or allow students to have access to it. Now that is a big one. Some school systems don't look at this one as strongly as others. I worked in a system that they basically told us, you do not ever transport a student in your personal car. There are some school cars available. You get that, and that's when you take them, but you don't take them in your own car. Well, I came to a county that did not look at it as that important, and so they were used to transporting students in their own vehicles. So we tried to do some education, and hopefully it got to the point they were not putting themselves in jeopardy. But that's one of those things that you really need to be very, very careful about. And it says, do not give students hall passes to come to your room on non-school related business. Do not allow students to engage you in conversations regarding their romantic or sexual activities, and don't discuss your personal problems with students. Do not entertain students in your home unless it is a school-sponsored activity. And do not make sexual comments about their bodies or tell sexual jokes or share sexually oriented material with students. Do not put your hands on a student in a manner that a reasonable person could interpret as inappropriate. So those are the cautions for teachers and other employees. Now, the cautions for principals, and we'll look at these and then we'll talk about the case study. Don't assume that other good teachers will not harm children. Don't assume that only certain types of students engage in sexual harassment. Don't assume that only certain types of students can be victims of sexual harassment. Don't confuse sexual harassment with flirting or giving someone a compliment. Don't assume that sexual harassment did not take place if there are no witnesses. Don't assume that sexual harassment is an isolated incident. And then you have an affirmative duty to protect students and employees from potential harm, ensure that no retaliation is taken against a person who reports abuse, promptly investigate all complaints, report the suspected abuse to the appropriate state agency, report the suspected abuse or complaint of abuse to the appropriate school district person, document the investigation process, evaluate the circumstances in the case of an unsubstantiated complaint to determine if any actions could be misconstrued and eliminate those actions, and provide ongoing education about sexual harassment by reminding staff members of the importance of appropriate behavior, reminding them of the state statutes and school district policy, reminding students that no one has the right to touch them in a sexual manner, and reminding students how to complain if they believe they've been touched inappropriately, and reminding students that if they have any concerns, they're strongly encouraged to talk to the principal. And I would add the guidance counselor. If it's a small school, then sometimes girls are not going to want to talk to a male principal, and guys are not going to want to talk to a female principal. So sometimes you have to take your gender and offer another opportunity for someone else to talk with someone. So those are the big things that you should keep in mind when you're dealing with any of the things. Now, some of those things I would be careful about doing. I know the book says that you need to remind students of these kinds of things. I don't know that I would bring it to students' attention, because if you bring it to students' attention, guess what? You're going to have more of it. So I think there might be some ways to talk about it. It might be something that your guidance counselors cover in some class visitations or something like that. So this book has generally some good information. So do you have any other questions or comments about anything related to the things related to sexual harassment, inappropriate touching, inappropriate conduct, or anything like that before we look at this case study? All right, let's look at this case study, and this is a different one from the one that you're going to discuss in your group, but it has some of the same issues that you'll be discussing in one of the case studies, or probably already discussed. You're a junior high school principal. A parent has come to discuss an issue concerning her 13-year-old daughter who was complaining about the girls, and the mother's complaining about the girls' basketball coach. He was giving special after-practice instruction to her daughter and to 2 other ninth-grade girls, although they're not on the same days. He meets with these students after the rest of the team's been dismissed. The parent indicates that several times the daughter has arrived late for dinner. The parent relates, the coach always drives her home, but the time will frequently be as much as half an hour after we've started eating. Last evening she arrived late, but this time she had been crying. She would not tell her parents what the difficulty was, saying only, "I wasn't good enough." The parent assumed she was talking about her playing ability and let the matter go while offering a comforting word. Later, the parent noticed that her daughter's t-shirt was torn, so her suspicions were heightened. And so she started asking, what's he doing with these girls? So she had talked with the parents of the other daughters, and they were not any help to her. Their daughters had been home by dinner time, even after the late practices. So you get this complaint. You're the principal. So what is the first thing you're going to do when you get this complaint?
Well, I thought about it. You know, I'm a basketball coach.
Right.
And if I was a principal, the first thing I probably would ask the parent is, had they had conversation with the, I would ask the parent, have you had a conversation with the coach?
Right.
That would, I mean, I'm just thinking, you know, from a coach perspective, that's what I would want to happen. And like, well, you know, I try to get parents to be open-minded, but that'd be the first thing I would want them to, that's what I would say to the parent.
And you would also, even if it wasn't a coaching situation, even if it was just a teaching situation, right, that would be a good question. Have you talked with this teacher? Suppose the parent comes back and said, I don't feel comfortable talking with the teacher about this situation. Then what are you going to do?
Then I will probably set up a meeting with the parent, and that, because I've had that situation with me being a coach, you know, they will go to the athletic director, and then the athletic director will meet all parties. Yeah. And then we'll proceed from there.
Okay. All right, any other ideas?
Personally, being that it's asking from our role as the principal, I've got several major issues here. So the parent being the one coming in, I would immediately inform the parent that clearly an investigation would occur. I would ask the parent if they'd be willing to bring the student in, so this way the student and the parent can be there for an interview. And then looking into it, as the principal, I would have never approved a single one-on-one coaching session of the coach and an individual student, male or female. I would have never approved of the coach giving that student a ride home. So immediately I would reprimand the coach and then inform them that further investigation is going to take place and that they would be questioned based on the situation as well.
And you've nailed a lot of the issues with this. You would, you know, even if the child didn't come in with the parent, you would have to talk with the child. And if you didn't do it, you could get a guidance counselor or an assistant principal who was female or something to talk with the child, but you need an answer from the child. The child's not even told her parents what happened. If you notice the way this is written, the child has not told her parents what has happened. All the parent knows is she's getting home late, the coach is bringing her, and something happened and she's not good enough. So, you know, there's lots of issues here dealing with speculation. So you got, when this kind of stuff happens, and if it's all speculation, you have got to get some information out of the student. And the sad part is sometimes students have such a bad home life that they make things up about school things that happen because that gets the parents off of them. And then at those points in time, the parents will attack the school. And that's the only time the child ever sees the parent taking their side, because often the parent is really not a good parent to them at home. But if they come up with a good enough story, they'll attack the school verbally. So, you have so many issues, as Anthony pointed out, in this situation. All right, what about some of the other things? What ideas do any of the rest of you have?
Given the nature of what's happened here is a violation of numerous policies in our county, I would have to take this to our HR director or superintendent just to let them know and be, aware of what's going on so that they could be involved if necessary.
And that's a good point. Worst case scenario, there's not anything that has happened inappropriately to the girl, but they violated a whole lot of policies. So best case scenario, I should say that, best case scenario, you're going to have to write them up for the things that they've done against the policies. And you're going to have to create some type of an action plan and get them to respond to it to try to get those problems solved. Worst case scenario, they're guilty of something totally inappropriate, and you're going to have to turn it over to law enforcement. You've done your investigation, you've notified the superintendent or the HR or the two of them, and then you've turned it over to law enforcement. So law enforcement finds there's an issue. So that's when you will have to be working with HR to determine what kind of suspension it's going to be until the investigation is finished. And then go from there.
Dr. Todd, in our best case scenario here, where the write-up would have to occur and the action plan would have to be established with the coach, what would that action plan look like? With this specific scenario, what would be what would be your recommendation as a principal of what that coach needs to do as far as the steps of rectifying the issue?
Well, the first thing you would tell them is it stops. You're not going to do this anymore. If you do this again, you're going to lose your job. So what you would do is to make your document look really legal. What you would do is you would go back and find all of the policies that the person has not followed. You would put it in a letter, and in the letter you would stipulate you are not supposed, according to this policy, you're not supposed to keep students one-on-one. You're not supposed to be driving students home. Did it say you don't need to be giving students special after practice instruction one-on-one? And you would go back to all of those policies and you would note what they are. And then after you've noted those, then you would go in and say, you have been doing this. We verified that this has occurred. Therefore, you will stop doing these things. If you continue to do them, your employment is in jeopardy. And then you sign the letter, have a space for them to sign the letter, and then to make a response. I always, in every letter that I had to send to employees, if it was some type of a letter to reprimand them, I would always ask them to please respond. I think you owe it to your employee to respond. Now, nothing may have been going on, but nobody knows that. And all you've got is what the parents are speculating and what you finally are able to get out of the student. You hope nothing has been going on. So you hope that your letter of reprimand, when you bring it to the coach's attention, will solve the problem. But you got it. That's your first step. That's your first piece of documentation should this continue to be a problem. That answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
All right. Anybody? David.
I just want to add in, we had our athletic director. This is a coach, and I just wanted to add on to that. was that what in the North Carolina Association, we have a lot of certifications online that we have to do. And so one of the things our athletic director does when it comes to, situations made like that, somebody may be carrying somebody home or something. I think what she does is that she has the coach to do that certificate over again and have it turned in. And that way it's dated and documented that, hey, it goes in their files that, nothing major, but hey, we documented that this person was retrained on something may have been inappropriate, however it may be, what the policies that we look from our coaches.
Yeah. And that's always good to do that. Every year, Gardner Webb has us to go on line and review some of their policies, and we have to print the certificate off. They have the record of it, and we have that we've done it. So that's a really good practice that your athletic director is doing. Any other ideas?
Could you put your coach on supervised practices? I mean, it's taking somebody out of their time, but for the safety of the children, if somebody's trying to accuse them of something, say your practice has to end at such and such time, but somebody's going to be there observing you outside of your coaching staff just to make sure things are followed through the way they're supposed to be.
That's a great idea. And the other thing to keep in mind, once these kind of allegations start, they can get worse. And it might be that you ask some of your coaches to double up on practices so that there's not ever just one coach and one adult in the room with the group, so that there will be somebody at the practices that will be an observer. Or you could actually start asking friends to drop in just to be there. It'd have to be somebody that you really trusted, that you knew would be someone that was appropriate to be in the school. So that's not a real good idea, but it would be better than being totally alone with students after this kind of allegation has started. So you sometimes have to do creative things. It might be that the principal could drop by sometimes. It might be that the athletic director could drop into some of the practices. Now, there is one situation that I am sure almost every coach gets caught in. What if there's a kid sitting there and the parent doesn't come to pick them up? And you try. The same thing happens when it's a field trip. You called every number that you've got available. The kids have called and nobody is there to pick them up. Well, one of the things that you can do to help you a little bit to keep you from getting in so much trouble, and I don't recommend this, but rather than you spend a whole night there, you can call the parent and say, do you mind if this person rides home with somebody such and such that's going that way? Or I can bring him if you'll meet me at such and such a place. I can do that. So that saves you a little bit. It's not ideal, but we all deal with it. I did whenever we took kids on field trips. And so while you got the policy, you also have common sense that you have to use. You don't want to violate policies. They're there to protect you, but you also can't afford to spend the entire night at the school waiting for somebody to come pick somebody up when they're not going to do it. And we're getting more and more kids that don't have people that will pick them up, that we're there in place of the parents. And have I talked with you about the phrase in loco parentis? Do you remember? Remember, as a principal, your first job is you're there in loco parentis, and that simply means you are there as in the absence of the parent. So your job is to look after those students first and foremost, your faculty as well. But you think about it as these are my kids while they're at school. And so would I want this to happen to my children? And if I wouldn't, then maybe it's not the best approach. So that's where the in loco parentis comes in. A lot of times the issues with in loco parentis come in when you turn everything over to the school resource officer. Even though you have an agreement with a law enforcement agency for them to be on campus and to help and do some things, sometimes it's best for the school personnel to handle it before they turn it over to the law enforcement agencies. So sometimes you have more discretion than they do. So now I think we pretty well covered the questions, what actions and what will you tell the, we haven't really talked about, what are you going to tell the parents after you have completed your investigation and you've decided on a plan of action?
I mean, you'd share the plan of action with them enough, you know, so they feel comfortable, and then you give them the results as much as you can. I mean, let's say he was at no fault for any sexual misconduct, but maybe he definitely was at fault for being alone with a student. You say, you know, this was at fault. We can't discuss, you know, disciplinary actions, but here's what we're going to do moving forward.
Right. Okay. And you're very careful what you share with the parents, because you don't want to get yourself in a legal liability situation where you shared more with the parents than you need to. Many times, the less that you can say, the better off you're going to be. So you would have to get back with the parents. You would tell them that it has been investigated. You would give them as little information as possible to solve the problem. Just say, you could say, we have investigated the situation and we have come up with a plan to make sure this doesn't happen in the future. So you don't want to say anything that's going to leave you legally liable. And so sometimes in trying to be so accommodating to parents when teachers have not used good judgment, you actually open yourself up to be the person that's going to be talked about. So you have to be really careful in these situations. And so sometimes if you're going to put it in letter form that you're going to send to parents, then you might want to send it to your central office and get another pair of eyes on it. All right, any other questions? Thank you for joining tonight, and I really hope that it's been beneficial. I looked at the calendar and I thought, we only have 2 weeks left after this one. And I know we've got the case studies that we're going to be dealing with, case study 3 next week, and case study 4 the last week. And I thought these things are so important, I really want to address them. I look at my job is to help you be prepared for that first job in administration. And a lot of these things you gain by experience. And so that's what I want you to be able to think about. You know, what would you do if you were in these situations? And so that's the reason I did this, and I hope it was useful. All right, anything else for tonight?
Dr. Todd?
Yes.
If we've submitted task 4 to you, do we wait for feedback from you before we do the turn it in part, or do we just go ahead and put the narrative together and do it on turn it in?
All right. I was caught up with everything on Sunday, I think, but I have had meetings yesterday and today. I should have it done by tomorrow.
Okay.
So I will try to look at any task 3s or 4s and get those back to you. The one thing I'm always finding on task 4s is you've not tied the 3 together. You've not tied the class content, the artifact, and the internship. Some people are getting confused, the competency folio with the reflection or task 4. Task 4 doesn't need any of your evidences. You can leave them in if you want to, but it's where you are thinking about and writing about how the reading materials, the case studies, the artifact development for the task, and the internship activities, how they've all fit together and helped you grow in the competencies. The competency folio is where they want the evidence, and the evidence is usually tied to something related to your internship. It can be some of the artifacts. So give me one more day. I will try to have it ready and get you feedback, and then, but go ahead and start putting it together.
Okay.
Okay, good question. Any other of you have questions? All right, you have a wonderful rest of the week, and I'll see you next Tuesday night for this discussion on case study 3.